Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 4 of the Monday Q&A, so let's get balls deep in this one. Can you explain in the Monday Q&A about fat cells being created when you gain fat, and if they're only shrunk or completely destroyed when cutting? And also if it's easier to gain fat when you have had more fat in the past due to merely shrunk and not destroyed fat cells. This is something that's been proposed for a while. I saw this a decade ago when they found studies showing that people who gain large amounts of body fat, they do have hyperplasia. They increase their fat cell count. And then people would say, aha, there you go. That's why fat people stay fat and regain fat easier, because they have more fat cells. But the ironic part there is that it doesn't create more energy. And I have known people who were morbidly obese who've cut down and done bodybuilding shows, or examples all over the internet, who have got shredded with shrink-wrapped skin and striated glutes, who still have all those extra fat cells. Fat cells can also be shrunk infinitely small, and when you do get really lean, they have found that some people, they do start losing those extra fat cells. When they get so small that the body, just there are practically membranes left, it'll go ahead and destroy some of those. But the idea that this means that you will always regain fat faster or make fat loss more difficult is really silly, because yeah, sure, you've got more surface area because of more fat cells on each fat cell to transport stuff back and forth easier in theory. And that's your body's defense, because it realizes that you are doing a lot with your fat cells, so it needs to transport energy quickly across that barrier. But having more fat cells doesn't create or destroy energy. You're still looking at total energy turnover, and if you're not storing fat at a faster rate, why would you gain fat at a faster rate? And if you're burning fat at a faster rate due to your total activity versus energy versus, your diet versus your activity, then logically speaking, why would you have more trouble losing fat? If anything, having more cell membrane surface area would create transport both directions easier. I don't think it actually matters, because it doesn't change energy turnover, but if it did matter, it would mean that you would gain fat easier and lose fat easier as well, because more surface area would also allow fat to exit those cells at a higher speed and a higher rate, because cell membranes are a two-way transporter. So the whole idea behind it being the reason that someone who's fat doesn't lose weight easier or they regain it more quickly, it doesn't hold water, because it has to work both directions if you're increasing the surface area that you can transport the energy through. Just my take on it. And honestly, and even though the theory has been shown that it does that, we don't have evidence that the higher fat cells changes the amount of fat you can gain or lose. So the evidence isn't there that it does that. Alright, next question. Did the old school bodybuilders count macros and calories? And I've never heard Leroy Colbert, for instance, talk about calories and macros. I assume these men ate a strict diet so they could probably eat by feel. Okay, let's look at that for a minute. I'm going to assume by old school you mean 1960s and further back, not 1970s and up, because guys from Arnold's era talked about calories. Arnold Schwarzenegger, in his books, like his Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, talks about tracking calories strictly, down to the calorie. Mike Minzer wrote about tracking calories as part of his contest prep even in 1980. So if that's old school to you, then yeah, they tracked calories. They didn't always track macros. I don't think you need to track macros strictly. I don't think it is a requirement for someone to get contest repped. I think net calories is still ultimately more important, as long as your macros are fairly consistent. Meaning, if you're not adding, or particularly if you're not changing dramatically your fat intake or your protein intake, and you're just manipulating carbs a little bit, I think you only have to track calories. It's only when you start making major changes that macros become important, so that you can rechange your baseline based upon thermic effect and all of that. So it is calories there. But the other thing to remember, yeah, they got results in the 50s and 60s doing that, but you also need to remember they didn't get nearly as lean as modern bodybuilders. By internet standards, a lot of your professional and top bodybuilders from the 1950s and 1960s would be called fat fucks on the internet by a bunch of, skinny kids who don't know anything, but they would be called fat fucks on the internet, while in their contest shape it was winning shows. Because some of them were like 12-13% body fat when they're winning shows. They weren't counting calories, but they also were not getting really, really lean. Alright, next question. Why is it that I see so many gearheads or fake natties without any of the 3 side effects of gear? Balding, acne, or gyno. Those are only 3 of the side. Those aren't the 3 side effects. Those are 3 side effects, and most of those are relatively minor. Again, as someone who shaves their head, I don't even consider balding to be a side effect. But as far as those go, okay, those are what you would call visible side effects that most people can see. There's a lot of other side effects. And here's the thing you have to remember. First of all, side effects are genetic. There are people out there genetically who can use unlimited amounts of anabolic steroids or testosterone and experience no side effects because their genes are just set up to where they are genetically immune to each and every side effect. Now that would be obviously a very rare individual because it would be separate genes for every side effect. Some people are more prone to changes in blood pressure, changes in water weight, gyno, hair loss. Those are all individual sets of genes involved with that, but there are people who just have that combination where they're immune to everything. And we usually call those people pro bodybuilders when they go on gear. And in fact, that's generally good genetics for pro bodybuilding, means a high tolerance for the drugs. That's what we mean by really good genetics for bodybuilding. They can use very, very, very high amounts of drugs with minimal health and side effect issues. But so different people are genetically immune, and the thing is, every single side effect that you just listed can be controlled. Those are all completely avoidable side effects. So if you're seeing a ton of people with those side effects, it's a problem. They don't know what they're doing. Because gyno can be completely controlled with aromatase inhibitors, keeping your E2 in range, or just using stacks that can't cause gyno. There are anabolic stacks out there that cannot cause gynecomastia, period. Not saying they're the best ones to use, they have their own set of issues, but they can't cause it. Acne can be controlled mostly through hygiene and just keeping your skin very, very clean, because anabolics cause acne by causing your sebaceous glands to excrete more oil in your skin. You get oily skin, gets more bacteria on it, you get more acne. If you wash that oil off with soap and hot water often enough, you could reduce the acne up to 80 to 90%. For people who can't avoid it, people use drugs for that. And I think those drugs are very harsh, and I would see those as a last resort because they're worse, far worse for you than the steroids are. But there are drugs to stop the acne. Same with the balding, as we just discussed earlier in the Q&A with Propecia. Guys who are balding from using testosterone and they don't want that, they just take Propecia. So given that every single one of these side effects is completely avoidable, the entire online steroid community knows how to avoid them, would you expect to see these side effects in fake natties and even open gear users that often if they really wanted to avoid them? No, of course not. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 5.